So I've read, things about different what I would call world-class organizations, like Nike,
Yeah,
where Phil Knight has a particular culture he instilled very early in the company. It's
right,
about competitiveness and winning, and that's really what the Nike culture is about, whereas the
right,
Coca-Cola culture is something different and the IBM culture is something different.
right.
So is there like a best practices culture or
Yeah.
a best culture, or is it just like there's elements that are good in all cultures, but you define what it is, and as long as you stick with that, that's your identity?
Yeah, I think that last one is probably more spot on. I think there are some elements that are common to what one would call a great culture.
Okay.
In today's environment, especially with however you want to define them, millennials, I guess it's Generation Y employees, number one, they're incredibly smart, and there's a lot of them, and they're in high demand.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a culture that's appealing to them and fulfilling to them, regardless of the money, they're going to leave.
Yeah.
So that's actually one of the things that has shifted. And that shift has played up to all the way people like us, baby boomers.
Yeah.
So what happens? What does that mean? It means that I know the organization cares about me. I know that I'm in a place where I'm going to be heard. I'm going to have a part to play in something that's important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be given feedback. I'm going to be given challenges. I'm going to have a chance to develop myself, to get better. All those things to me are kind of elements of the culture now.
Okay.
Now, as you said, it's going to play differently because it depends on the set of people that you have.
Yeah.
Now, I do think there are going to be cultures that are going to do much better when they're more focused and process driven and they have a clear idea about where they want to go. And I believe there are other cultures that can be also successful that are a bit more free thinking
Okay.
and aren't as rigid and bounce things off of each other. But there's got to be something in common that really works for everybody. And at the end of the day, you want to get results and you want to have a place where people love working.
Yeah. Now, do you believe that you can kind of consciously define a culture, or that you can change a culture? I remember this was decades ago, but the famous McKinsey consultant Lou Gerstner eventually became the CEO of IBM, and he really transformed IBM, which you would never think that IBM was something that
Right.
was transformable.
Right.
I don't even know if that's a word, but
Right.
but they stuck with many of the kind of core values that the corporation had had for many years. So as an example of that versus like a very small company, like Entropic, when I started there, we had, I don't know, 60 employees, we were still a young company, we had some contractors, but even then, I mean, the culture wasn't set in concrete, but there was a lot of elements of it where I had to make a decision before I joined. Is this a group of people, a group of founders, a group of engineers that,
Right.
have the same values and the same types of
Exactly.
things that I look for? I mean, those are two various different extremes. But I guess the basic question is, can you design a corporate culture, and are there times when it's too late to do that?
Yes, I think in the latter one, pretty much yes. I think people will, it's arguably yes, this latter one. So let's start with the first one. Is it important to do early on, and can you do it? Of course you can. I think there are elements, and you're even talking about using IBM as a good example. In a good corporate culture, it starts with values and operating principles.
Mm-hmm.
What's most important to us? That's the what. And then the second part is the how, which often is a structure or process that helps us. Sometimes it's a way of engaging each other we all commit to doing.
Mm-hmm.
So the what and the how are the beginnings of that. So if I work with a company, the first thing I'm going to understand is, what do you really value about this place?
Mm-hmm.
What's most important to you? And what are some principles to operate under? Now, I'm going to use an example of a company that I like quite a bit. It's the number one hedge fund in the world. It's called Bridgewater, Connecticut. And Ray Diallo was the founder. He's no longer the CEO. But he had a basic feeling that one of the principles that was important to him was get to the truth. Get to reality, get to the truth. Now, he has a number of others, but that one is the overarching one. So what does it mean? It means I'm at a meeting, and if I don't speak up about something that's on my mind, I'm not fulfilling my role in the corporate culture. So the flip side of it is they're actually asking me to speak up. They want to hear me. And if I say something, somebody's not going to contradict me. They're going to probably ask me a question. What do you mean? Tell me more. What got you here? Why? What was your thinking? Those questions probably take an extra minute or two, but they ferret out input that could be invaluable for making decisions. Because after all, what's the point of saying get to the truth? It's so you can make decisions, better decisions, faster.
But you really have to, I've worked for organizations that say they value that.
Right.
And when somebody speaks up, they're criticized or ostracized,
right,
or whatever it might be if it doesn't agree with the decision or the view of the leader.
The prevailing norm, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so how do you create that, I would call it like a culture of real openness? Does Bridgewater really have that?
Yes.
Or is it, okay, so why, was that formed early in the organization, and then basically those norms and those, attitudes and how we deal with things, how we communicate were established, and they hired people that were comfortable with that kind of thing, that,
right,
being challenged and
being... that's also an important part.
Okay.
Who you hire. Well, there's 3 elements. I'm not saying they're the only 3. We talked about one, which is values and principles. Another element is what I'm going to call the structure that helps you. So let's say the structure is feedback. Let's say the structure is learning a process in which we're going to ferret out people's points of view. So my whole point is let's say the structure is I can't make or articulate something until I fully understand what someone else means. And I watch that. When someone brings something up, let's say part of the structure says one of the norms is they are not to get ostracized. They are not to be embarrassed for asking the question, but it doesn't mean they're going to be agreed with. It doesn't mean they're not going to be challenged, because we want to challenge them. And regularly we're going to give each other feedback on how we're doing. Now, as strange as this sounds, Bridgewater actually videotapes every meeting. They have
Big Brother, or
well, that's what they're accused of, but they're not doing it to do gotchas and catch you. They're so you can number one, review for yourself, but also if you're not at the meeting, you get to have a documentation of what it is. My expectation is when I leave a meeting, I am very likely to get some kind of feedback. Now, they have a piece of software on their iPhones where everyone who's at the meeting pops up. And if you feel like somebody needs feedback because it would to their betterment. Now, that's another thing. If at any time the feeling is you're not giving somebody feedback with the intention of helping them, but you're giving feedback with the intention of helping you, that's frowned upon. That's called out.
So this is a culture that was established early on, and it's grown to be a relatively big company. And
reinforced regularly, over and over again.
And the leader believes in it, and there's basically rewards and punishments, or
Generally speaking, yes. So you've got principles and values, you've got structure, and then the last piece is people engaging each other. So on a regular basis, in essence, everybody in the organization has I don't even know what the term they use, but I'm going to call it a coaching partner. And that person has 4 roles. One role is to be nothing more than a sounding board. One role is to be nothing more than a place for you to go vent, because they do believe you get to vent. Because everyone's got that need. But as a coaching partner, when you're done venting, the very next question I say, okay, Patrick, so what are we going to do now? How are we going to move this forward? Third thing is to be an advisor. Like you said, gee, I have this challenging meeting. I'm not sure how to deal with this. What do you think? So I'm giving you the point of view. And the fourth thing is to be your coach. So I'm regularly giving you feedback on how I see you showing up, what I'm hearing, so forth. So it's actually, I feel entrusted that in essence, I have a coach. My go-to person who's helping me along the way, as well as I have a manager, as well as I'm very likely to have a mentor. So there's all these pieces.
And these are going to be different people, or is one person doing all these things?
No, you don't want to have your coaching partner be somebody you report to. You want it to be fairly level. So up here. So what
now is that like a value that all organizations you believe should have, or you're just giving an example of a culture that has this particular thing and how it works?
I'm giving you an example of a culture. I do think that that idea of some kind of structure that where I can regularly have somebody I trust whose commitment is to my development and growth and improvement, that's a big deal. And most of the time, because we are hierarchical, it's going to be my manager too, but it's got to be an addition of. So I really like the concept. I also like the idea of having regular, or whatever you want to call them, structures or practices that help me. So, how we run a meeting, how we make decisions were some of the things we talked about earlier.
Okay. So can you, this gets back to the previous thing, IBM, can you transform a culture?
I had said to you, arguably, you can't, in my opinion. It's really hard to do. So can you? I mean, yes, it takes a deep daily commitment from the CEO. Absolute. And the culture that you're trying to practice needs to be modeled and managed to by the next layer down and then the next layer down. Because if it isn't being modeled at the top, it goes nowhere.
So that's really difficult. It's what we talk about. It's hard to swing around and pick up a water skier in an aircraft carrier. It's like you're just not as maneuverable in that situation. But aircraft carriers are very good for other things.
Yes, they are. Yes.
So I think that it is a tough thing. So should startups focus on culture in the beginning, or is it just like let it evolve, or it just naturally is going to come depending upon who the CEO is, or do you get together with the team and talk about it and what do we want to be and not want to be, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a big believer that you should create your culture because it's going to be created anyway.
Yeah.
Now, I'm saying at the beginning you might want to contour it so from a timely standpoint it's not impacting people's time. Because the whole goal is, why would you put energy and time into having a culture? Is because you want to make better decisions faster, you want to execute better, you want to communicate better, you want to do things better on a regular basis. In a startup mode, you're kind of in survival phase, at least until you get some early stages of financing.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be in that mode, why not be as good as you could possibly be?
Yeah.
So I like to say, you get to build the culture from the ground up. Otherwise, it's going to build you.
So let me give you an example out of my experience. So one of the companies that I ran, and I kind of have this belief based on dealing with a lot of founding teams and entrepreneurs, is that when you want to start something, start a company or start a war or start whatever, you need to have people that are more unorthodox. Why I call them anarchists. So you need to have people that are out of the box thinkers and extremely passionate and
right.
Just people that are like that, because you're as Peter Thiel talks in his book, the 0 to 1 is different
right.
than 1 to some bigger number.
Exactly.
So I've worked with some of those people, and they don't necessarily have the culture that I would want, because a lot of times they're very anti-authority. They're
right.
They're anarchists.
Right.
But the amount and the quality of what they can accomplish can be incredible and invaluable in a startup organization.
Sure.
And how do you? I know how I've dealt with it, but
right.
as an executive coach, as somebody that's dealt with many more companies than I have, because I've mainly dealt with companies I work with and then working with founder CEOs on other types of issues. So what do you just make an exception for the crazy person, or you say,
oh, now it's the crazy person. Well, remember we talked about culture has a lot of components?
Yeah.
And perhaps in this case, we actually just agree on one or two things.
Okay.
But that's the goal. Get everybody in the room to agree on those one or two things. Because after all, if you don't agree, let's say you have anarchists and everybody wants to go in a different direction, you will crash and burn.
Right.
It's almost guaranteed. So there's got to be some commonality. And part of that commonality may be starting one place. So let's start with one thing, not 3 or 4 or 5 things. Let's just start with one.
Yeah.
And maybe it's how we make decisions. Maybe we agree on how that's going to be done.
Yeah.
And we just start there. Because what you want to do is a culture builds with momentum. So you don't have to have the whole thing in place, which you're right, may actually be restrictive to many people and to many of their talents that you want to bring out. So start small.
Well, I guess the thing that, as I've worked with these types of people, I'm thinking of one in particular individual, but they're very difficult to manage.
Right.
So my ability to manage a person like that is different than my ability to manage other people in the team,
True.
other people in the organization.
Right.
Because basically you can't really manage them, you just kind of point them in the general direction and make sure, the guided missile blows up the enemy and it doesn't blow up yourself. But in the same context, there will be collateral damage with these types of individuals. So you wake up as a CEO every day and say, does the value this person's providing dramatically outweigh the collateral damage to the organization?
Sure.
Or is this the day of reckoning that we address this issue?
Right.
And maybe some people are always that way, and you find a way to work around them. But if you are like constantly, if you have dozens of those people and you make exceptions all over the place, that becomes your culture. Is like a culture of exceptions versus a culture of the standard.
Yeah, which makes no sense at all.
Yeah, so as an expert in this kind of stuff, how do you recommend somebody like me or any of our CEOs out there, founders, startup executives dealing with situations like this? Because you want to have a culture where you have efficient meetings and you have a culture of openness and you have a culture of getting things done and thoughtful decision making and a bias towards action and people agreeing to disagree and everybody getting on board and everybody in the boat and rowing in the same direction.
Correct.
But sometimes you have these people that are incredibly valuable that you make an exception for. So
it's a good example. So I'm not going to go on the presumption that every out-of-the-box talented person is also going to be difficult, because it's not true.
It's not true. That's totally not true.
So, on a certain level, if you're hiring only for talent and not for personality, you got to be a little careful. But at the startup phase, you're going to hire probably a little bit more for talent than for personality. I get that. The second thing you said that I also agree with is I'm going to manage fluidly and with agility. So how I manage this person may be a little different than how I manage that person, but I'm going to set the expectation with the whole team ahead of time to tell them, I'm going to try to bring out the best in each of you. And I've got to make a call on how I need to do that. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, like I said, you got to come to some commonality with the so-called anarchists in the room. What can we agree on so that we are pointed in the same direction, are heading to the same place, and everyone feels like this is part of a game that I want to be playing for.
Okay.
And the fourth thing you said is the decision point. And in my opinion, companies make that decision way too late, which is this person's collateral damage quotient is way too high.
Yeah.
And it's way too painful. And we hang on too long, we rationalize why, because they're talent and we need their whatever capability, their scientific brain power, their technical brain power, or whatever it is, but at the cost of being the company that we really want to be. And at the end of the day, we don't really want to, this wasn't what we wanted.
Yeah.
But we're now stuck with it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in the early stages, kind of the early innings of a company, there are no redundancies. So, you have single point of failure all over the place. It even gets down to the point where, we're building a product and we don't even document it. Who am I documenting for myself? You know? So, but eventually you do have to grow up and you do have to put processes and procedures in place. And once you remove that redundancy, maybe you don't do it with one individual, but 2 or 3 individuals that cover that, then you're in a situation where you can make a change.
Yeah. So that's also your adaptation to make the whole organization work, but also bring out the best in each individual.
So any other kind of thoughts on culture and kind of what are the things that, especially our audience of entrepreneurs, startups should think about when they're trying to establish a culture and what's important, what's not important?
Yeah, exactly. And that conversation's a great conversation to have. What is important? What's important in terms of where we want to go? What's important about what we want to be?
Yeah.
to get there. Okay. What's important to us in terms of I want to be here because this is a place I love coming to, I'm engaged in. It isn't just the technology or the science or the product. What else is there? What else is important to me? And having that conversation across the organization, that small organization, is not only important, but it's a pretty easy one to have because you're so small.
So what's the size in terms of number of employees where you feel like you can still mold it and then it's relatively set and you're talking about very minor changes after that?
It depends on the industry. Some people say you could do it still at 30 or 50. I think you hit a kind of an inflection point around 100, 150, where there's by that time a culture starting to cement itself.
Yeah.
So if you weren't intentional early on and now you want to be intentional, it's a little harder, but still manageable. Mm-hmm. Once it gets into the few hundreds, it becomes very difficult.
Okay. Well, this is a lot of good food for thought for the entrepreneurs out there. I mean, for me, the parting comments are really, make sure you're conscious about what kind of company and what kind of culture you want to build early on, and make that a part of your decision process as you're talking to people to bring into the company, and modeling those behaviors that are consistent with that as you run the organization.
Very important.
Okay, great. Well, this is Patrick Henry, the CEO of Quest Fusion with The Real Deal What Matters. We're talking to Leland Sandler, executive coach, about corporate culture, and this has been a fantastic session. Thank you very much, Leland.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.